He walked into the most expensive kitchen in the state with flour on his shirt and a 7-year-old girl holding his hand, and not a single person in that gleaming, copper-lined room had any idea they were looking at the man who had designed half the equipment in it. That was the thing about Damon Fisk. He didn't announce himself. He never had. The morning had started the way most of his mornings started. With his daughter Willa's elbow in his face at somewhere around 5:30, and the particular negotiation of a child who believed that waking up was something that happened to other people. She'd crawled into his bed again, the way she did 3 or 4 nights a week, not because she was afraid of anything specific, but because she had decided, somewhere in the permanent architecture of her 7-year-old logic, that his bed was better than hers and that the case didn't require further argument. He lay there for a minute with her hair in his mouth and stared at the water stain on the ceiling. He'd been meaning to patch it since February. It was now October. He got up. He made coffee. The coffee maker was ancient, a 12-cup drip machine that rattled through its cycle like it had opinions about being turned on before 6 in the morning. He'd been offered a newer one, a French press setup from someone at the farmer's market who thought he looked like someone who'd appreciate it. He'd said no. The old one had been Jenna's. Most things in the house had been Jenna's once. He stood at the kitchen window with his mug and looked out at the driveway. His truck needed the rear brake line checked. The side gate had a hinge that had been wrong for 2 months. There was a small wagon Willa had abandoned near the woodpile, with one wheel pointing at an angle that suggested structural damage and some optimism. The yard had the comfortable disorder of a place where one person was doing the work of 2, and doing it honestly, without pretending the math was different than it was. Damon Fisk was 39 years old. He was 6 feet even. Lean in the way that came from moving through the world rather than performing it. With dark hair going gray at the temples in a way he hadn't decided how to feel about yet. And hands that were never entirely clean along the knuckle lines no matter how hard he scrubbed. He had a face that held things quietly, the kind of face that made people think he was listening even when he wasn't, which was useful, though he usually was. He ran a repair shop called Fisk & Son out of a converted auto body garage on the south end of Cedar Falls, population 6,000 and dropping. The name was his father's idea originally. His father had been the first Fisk. Damon had kept it when he took over because changing it felt like a particular kind of erasure he wasn't ready for. The shop did engine work, transmission work, the occasional restoration job that came in by word of mouth from people who'd heard he was good at things that stumped other people. He had one employee, a man named Terrell, who was 58 years old and had been working on vehicles since before Damon was born, and who expressed his opinions in silences of varying lengths rather than actual words. What nobody who brought their truck in for an oil change knew, and what Damon had been careful to keep nobody knowing, was that he had spent 11 years before Cedar Falls as a lead development engineer at a firm called Mercer Precision Systems, a company that designed and manufactured commercial kitchen equipment for high-end restaurant groups and hospitality chains. Not appliances, infrastructure, the kind of integrated cooking systems that required structural load calculations and thermal management specifications, and were installed by teams with certifications. He'd held 3 patents. He'd overseen the engineering on a product line that currently ran in 47 Michelin-recognized restaurants across North America. He'd been profiled in a trade publication at 32 and quoted in 2 others before he'd stopped returning their calls. The acquisition had happened 14 months after Jenna's funeral. In the particular numbness of that period, when large things happened around him and he processed them from a distance, he'd come away from it with more money than he'd known what to do with, and a daughter who was 3 years old and had no other parent, and a set of skills so precisely fitted to a world he no longer wanted to be in, that the fit itself felt like the problem. Cedar Falls had been Jenna's hometown. Moving there had been his version of not knowing what else to do. The shop was important for a reason that had nothing to do with money. It was quiet. People came in. They had something wrong. He fixed it. Nobody asked how he was really doing. Nobody said his name with a weight on it. Nobody looked at him with the particular combination of admiration and pity that he'd been running from since he was 34. He got Willa up at 7. This required, as always, an extended diplomatic process that began with the light under the door. and progressed through the smell of toast, the distant report of the radio in the kitchen, and finally the sound of him getting her jacket from the hook, which she treated as a notice of eviction. She appeared at 7:19, dragging a stuffed rabbit that had been through things, wearing one sock, and carrying the small canvas bag she brought everywhere. It was green with a yellow handle, and it contained 2 rubber-tipped screwdrivers, a magnetic pickup tool that had been Damon's before she decided it was hers, and a measuring tape she called the stretcher. She set it on the table while he put her eggs in front of her. "Are we going past the bakery?" she asked. "No. Parts Run. Is it the Big Parts place or the one with the fish tank?" "Neither. We're going to Hartfield." Willa considered this. "That's far." 20 minutes. "That's far," she said again, with the certainty of someone for whom 20 minutes was a unit of real sacrifice. He needed a specific component, a thermal expansion valve, for a refrigeration unit he was rebuilding for a client. A piece that none of the local suppliers had in stock, and that Hartfield Culinary Supply, on the edge of the next county, had listed in their parts inventory when he'd called ahead. Hartfield Culinary Supply was technically a restaurant equipment distributor. In practice, it was the regional hub for a particular tier of the food service industry. The kind of operation that served groups who ran multiple locations and demanded consistency, and whose equipment budgets were other people's annual salaries. It had a showroom floor that ran to several thousand square feet, and a parts and service wing that stocked things nobody in Cedar Falls had ever needed to stock. Damon had been there twice before. Both times were quiet. Parts counter, in and out. He loaded Willa into the truck, buckled her bag into the middle seat at her instruction, and drove. "Is the fish tank at the other one?" Willa asked, approximately 4 minutes in. "Yes. Can we go there after?" "No." She looked out the window and seemed to accept this as provisional rather than final. Outside, the county road moved past in its October way, flat and amber and serious about the season. Willa pressed the magnetic pickup tool to the window and slid it upward experimentally. Hartfield Culinary Supply occupied a large industrial building off the highway access road, all matte panel siding and clean signage, the kind of building that didn't need to be impressive because the people who came to it already knew what it was. There was a small showroom section at the front. Cooking systems, refrigeration lines, ventilation setups, all of them running or displayed to suggest that they were running, and behind it, access through a doorway with a numbered keypad, the parts and service operation. He parked and went around to get Willa, who was already unbuckling herself with the efficiency of someone who considered being buckled a formality. "Bag," she said, reaching back for it. "Bag," he agreed. She took his hand as they went in. She did this in unfamiliar places, not because she was nervous, but because she was paying attention, saving her full processing capacity for observation rather than navigation. The showroom was cooler than it needed to be. It smelled faintly of machine oil and new rubber sealing, the honest smell of equipment rather than the performed smell of retail. A man and a woman in branded polos were talking near the refrigeration display. Neither of them looked up. Damon found the parts window at the rear. A young man with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead was sorting a manifest. "Cross repair. I mean Fisk. Damon Fisk. Fisk and Son. I called ahead about a thermal expansion valve." "Yeah, hold on." The young man typed something. "Should be in the back. Give me a sec." Willa had found a mounted display panel on the near wall, a cross-section diagram of a commercial refrigeration system, the kind used for training, with component labels and flow arrows. She was looking at it with the particular stillness she got when something was actually interesting to her. "That line's wrong," she said. Damon looked over. She was pointing at the refrigerant flow diagram, specifically at the indicated direction of suction gas travel relative to the expansion valve. "It goes the other way." He looked at it more carefully. She was right. The diagram had transposed the high-pressure and low-pressure sides. Not dangerously wrong. It was a display diagram, not an installation guide, but technically incorrect in a way that would matter to someone who actually needed to understand the system. "Good catch," he said. She accepted this without ceremony and went back to examining the rest of the panel. He heard the footsteps before he registered them as something to pay attention to. Sharp, deliberate, the sound of someone who walked with intention through rooms they considered theirs. They stopped a few feet behind him. "Excuse me." He turned. The man was somewhere in his mid-50s. Tailored vest over a branded shirt, the particular grooming of someone who spent real effort on presentation. His name badge read Boyd Kemper, Director of Client Services. He was looking at Damon with the kind of expression that had already decided something. "Can I help you find something?" "Parts pickup," Damon said. "I called ahead." Kemper's gaze moved across Damon's shirt. The flour was from breakfast. Willa had been helping with the biscuits, and down to his work boots, and then to Willa, who had not looked up from the diagram. The green bag hung from her shoulder. "This is a trade facility," Kemper said. "We primarily serve commercial accounts." "I have a commercial account," Damon said. "Account number 7741. I called this morning." A pause. Kemper's expression didn't change exactly, but something underneath it shifted, the particular recalibration of a man who'd committed to a performance and was now deciding whether to continue it. "The service wing isn't really set up for." He stopped. Another pause. He looked at Willa. Walk-in traffic. Willa still hadn't looked away from the diagram. "I'm not walk-in traffic," Damon said. "I'm a customer with a standing account picking up a part I ordered yesterday. The service wing is where the parts counter is." Something moved through Kemper's face then, the particular irritation of a man who wasn't used to being answered back in his own building and didn't have a clean line to escalate it. He was looking at Damon's hands, the knuckle lines, the flour. "We do have standards for." "The diagram's wrong, by the way," Willa said, without turning around. Both men looked at her. She pointed at the cross-section display. "The suction gas goes from the evaporator to the compressor, the arrows backward. If you install it like that, the system won't reach set point." She turned then finally and looked at Kemper with the direct and uncomplicated expression of a 7-year-old who didn't know she was supposed to be intimidated. "You should fix it so people don't get confused." The silence that followed was approximately 4 seconds long. Damon felt the thing move through him that he was familiar with, the slow heat that started somewhere below the sternum and moved upward, the feeling that always arrived with those 30 seconds of decision. He knew what Kemper had seen when he looked at them: flour, work boots, a kid with a canvas bag. He knew what Kemper hadn't seen, and he knew from experience that correcting that misperception, satisfying as it might feel in the moment, would give the man exactly the kind of engagement he was building toward. He looked at Willa. She was watching him, not frightened. She never frightened easy, but watching him the way she did, when she was reading his face to understand what kind of moment this was. "Your part ready?" Damon asked the young man at the counter, who had returned from the back with a small box component and was now looking at the wall above everyone's head with the focus of someone determined to be somewhere else. "Yes, sir." He slid it across the counter. "All set." Damon picked it up. He put his hand on Willa's shoulder, not firmly, just there, just the weight of it. "Come on, bug." "But," she looked at Kemper. "I know." They walked out. Behind them, Kemper said something under his breath. Damon caught the edge of it. The shape of it was clear enough without the words. Through the showroom, past the refrigeration display, past the 2 polo shirt employees who were now very interested in their clipboards, out through the glass doors, and into the October air. Willa waited until they reached the truck. "He was rude," she said. "Yes." "Why didn't you say something?" He got her buckled, closed her door, walked around to the driver's side. He sat there for a moment with his hands on the wheel before he started the engine. "Sometimes the thing you want to say isn't the thing that needs saying." She turned this over. "What does that mean?" He wanted a fight. He was looking for one. He started the truck. "I didn't give him one, so he lost?" Damon pulled out of the lot. He didn't get what he wanted. That's close enough. Willa was quiet for a long stretch, watching the road. Then, he looked at the bag, and that was the thing that sat in Damon's chest on the drive back. Not Kemper's words, not the performance of it. He'd absorbed that kind of assumption his whole life, mostly without injury, because he'd long since made a considered peace with the gap between what people thought they saw and what was actually in front of them. But Willa had been watching. Willa, who was 7, and had her mother's eyes, and her mother's way of going quiet when she was taking something in, had watched a man look at her bag and decide what she was worth, and had watched her father say almost nothing in response. He didn't know what story she was telling herself about what that meant. That was always the hard part. You could choose what you did. You couldn't choose what your 7-year-old made of it. The shop was already open when they got back. Terrell's truck was in the lot. Through the bay door, Damon could hear the radio running country music and the rhythmic sound of a socket wrench working something loose that didn't want to be loose. He parked, sat for another moment. Willa was drawing in her notebook. She pulled it from the seat pocket without being asked and started working on something with the concentration kids get when they're processing things they don't have words for yet. "Hey," he said. She looked up. What that man said about not belonging there. He was wrong. She looked at him with the clear, uncomplicated expression of someone checking a fact. "I know," she said. And then, the diagram was really wrong, though. It really was. She went back to her notebook. He got out. Terrell appeared from inside the bay, wiping his hands on a rag, and looked at Damon's face with the diagnostic patience of a man who had been reading the state of engines and people for 50 years. "Rough pickup?" Terrell said. "Parts are fine." Terrell glanced at Willa, who was making her way through the side door to the office where she had a folding table in the corner that had been set up for her at some point and never taken down. He looked back at Damon. "She all right?" "She's fine." She corrected a professional display diagram in front of the man who was being unpleasant and didn't blink. Terrell nodded slowly. "She's 7. I'm aware." "All right." Terrell went back to the bay. Then, from inside, "Coffee's from this morning. Fair warning." Damon put the part on the bench, found his morning's work where he'd left it, and got back to it. The incident sat in the low background of his thinking, the way problems did when he decided not to look at them directly. Present, faintly pressurized, waiting for a quieter moment to resolve. He'd made the right call. He believed that. What he didn't believe, fully, was that Willa had understood the right call the way he needed her to understand it. She was 7. She processed differently. She saw her father get talked to like that and then leave quietly, and the lesson she took from that depended entirely on the story she built inside those dark-haired, observant, careful eyes, and he didn't always know what story was being written in there. Around noon, Terrell found him under a diesel truck's front end and said there was a call. The caller was a woman named Sasha Creel. Damon had not heard that name before, but he knew the name attached to it, Creel. The Creel Hospitality Group operated a collection of destination restaurants in the region, the kind that people drove across state lines to visit, and its central showpiece, a restaurant called The Larder on the edge of Galvey County, had been written about in publications that Damon had spent the past 5 years carefully not reading. "Mr. Fisk." The voice was direct and tired in equal measure, the voice of someone who had been making difficult calls all morning and was rationing her patience carefully. "I got your name from a technical forum, a post you made about 5 years ago. Commercial refrigeration, low-load thermal cycling, a specific fault type in aging glycol-chilled systems." Damon was quiet for a moment. He remembered writing the post. He'd been working through a similar problem on a walk-in unit for a farmer's market operator and had documented the diagnostic approach because the information didn't exist anywhere accessible, and he'd thought someone might need it someday. "That post is old," he said. "The problem is older. We've had 3 technicians out in the past 3 weeks. None of them could diagnose it. The system's intermittently failing, and we have a pause that carried weight. We have 11 days before an event that requires it to function perfectly. A full-capacity service for a private dinner for which the reservations have been confirmed since April." He leaned against the wall. "What kind of system?" "Original glycol loop from the build-out. 2009. 2 zones, prep and walk-in, different set points. The fault only shows in the prep zone under specific load conditions. No error codes, no visible leak. 2 of the technicians replaced the expansion valve. The 3rd replaced the entire circulation pump. It's still faulting." That was interesting. Not the fault itself. He had a reasonable hypothesis about what it was already, but the pattern of misdiagnoses. Replacing components without having identified the root condition was a particular kind of wrong that meant everyone who'd looked at it had been looking in the right neighborhood and finding the wrong house. "Where are you located?" "Galvey. The restaurant's about 30 minutes from Cedar Falls." He thought for a moment. "I can look at it. I'm not making any promises about what I can do." "I understand that." "When?" "Tomorrow evening. After 7. I've got a daughter I put to bed first." A brief pause. "Not impatient. 7:30 if you need it." "7's fine." He hung up. He stood in the office for a moment, listening to the radio and the socket wrench, and Willa, humming something to herself at her folding table, where she was drawing an engine cross-section with the confident, approximate style of a child who was working entirely from memory and observation. The larder, Willa said without looking up. He turned. How do you know that name? You're looking at me like that, so it's a big deal. The larder is a big deal. I heard Mrs. Aldine talk about it. She paused her pencil. Is that the call? Yes. She nodded, considering. Are you going to go? I said I would. She went back to drawing. On the page, a refrigeration loop was taking shape, the kind of thing she'd seen him diagram at the kitchen table enough times that she'd internalized the basic topology. High side, low side, the thermal exchange in between. She had drawn it correctly. The larder was a building that understood what it was trying to be, which was an old dairy barn turned into something that felt like neither a barn nor a restaurant exactly, but like the best version of a room where people came to eat seriously. The exterior was timber and stone, with the bones of the original structure still visible inside the dining room. The kitchen was behind it, a separate addition, all stainless and glass, and the hum of systems working at scale. Sasha Creel met him at the kitchen entrance at 7:10. She was somewhere in her mid-40s. With the particular efficiency of movement that came from running a restaurant operation long enough that the building itself had become an extension of her thinking. She had the look of someone who had not slept fully in several weeks and had decided to be functional anyway. She didn't offer pleasantries. She said, "This way," and took him directly to the prep kitchen. He followed her through a corridor that smelled of rendered fat and fresh herbs, and the clean mineral edge of industrial refrigeration, and came out into a kitchen that was, even at 7 in the evening, partially occupied with a prep cook finishing mise en place for the following day. The refrigeration panel was on the far wall. He went to it. He pulled out the notes he'd made the night before, a legal pad with the fault pattern sketched out in the logical structure he always used before touching anything, and looked at the system. "Tell me what it does," he said. "It holds temperature in the walk-in without issue." The prep zone, she pointed at a line of low-profile refrigerated drawers built into the workstation. It drops out. Temperature rises. It comes back. No rhyme or reason to the timing. What's the ambient temperature in this room during service? 90 to 95. Full line. He looked at the panel again. When the fault happens, is it during service? During or just before? Never overnight. He nodded slowly. Has anyone checked the glycol concentration in the prep loop separately from the walk-in loop? She was quiet for a moment. Then, no. They treated it as a single system. It's not. The zones share the chiller, but the glycol distribution is split downstream of the secondary heat exchanger. He pointed at the panel schematic, a laminated diagram mounted to the side of the unit. This loop, the prep zone, is shorter, lower volume. Under high ambient conditions, the glycol concentration threshold for maintaining set point is different than the walk-in side. If the concentration has drifted over 15 years of top-offs with different mix ratios, he stopped. He was talking faster than he'd intended. The problem was interesting. That was the issue. Sasha was looking at him with the expression of someone whose previous 3 technicians had talked about expansion valves. "Can you check it?" she said. "I can check it tonight. I'll need a sample from each loop." He opened his bag and produced a small refractometer. "Do you have access to the system service ports?" She led him to them. He took his samples, ran the readings. The walk-in glycol concentration was within normal range. The prep loop read 4 percentage points lower. Not catastrophic, not a failed system, but exactly enough of a differential that under 90-degree ambient service conditions, with a shorter loop and a lower thermal mass, the effective refrigerating capacity fell below the set point demand. Every technician who'd come in had looked for a broken component. None of them had looked for a subtle drift condition in a fluid that had been topped off imprecisely a dozen times over 15 years, he straightened up. "That's it," she looked at him. "The glycol concentration in the prep loop is insufficient for your service conditions. The system isn't failing. It's running at the edge of its capacity and losing. Nobody's breaking. Everything's doing exactly what it's supposed to do with the wrong fluid. Can you fix it? Partial flush and recharge on the prep loop. Recalibrate the expansion valve setting to the corrected fluid spec. Maybe 4 hours of work, most of it waiting." He paused. "I can come back Thursday. It'll be done before your event." Sasha Creel looked at him for a long moment with the expression of someone running several calculations simultaneously. 3 technicians, she said. None of them knew to treat the loops as independent systems. How did you know? He looked at the panel schematic. I designed a similar split-loop configuration in 2013 for a hotel group in the Northwest. I documented the glycol drift problem because it showed up during commissioning, and I didn't want to deal with a service call 2 years later. He paused. It worked. I still got the service call 2 years later. Different installation, same drift. After that, I remembered it. She almost smiled. It was a very controlled almost. Thursday, she said. What time? 7. Same arrangement. He drove home through the county dark, Willa asleep in the back seat from the babysitter, transferred to the truck without fully waking. He carried her inside, got her shoes off, got the canvas bag onto the nightstand at her specific murmured instruction. The rabbit was already on the pillow. He sat at the kitchen table with his notes and a glass of water and thought about the system. He mapped the flush procedure in his head: volume, target concentration, valve resetting sequence. It was straightforward. What it required was patience and precision and the willingness to solve the actual problem rather than the apparent one. Thursday came. Terrell did the morning's work without being asked to take. More than he was being asked to take, which was how Terrell operated. At 5:30, Damon cleaned up properly and changed his shirt and picked up the tool bag from the back, the one that held the refractometer and the glycol mix kit and the calibration equipment he'd built out over years for exactly this kind of work. He stopped in the doorway of the office where Willa was doing her Thursday homework at the folding table. "I'm going back tonight," he said. She looked up. "The restaurant?" "Yeah." She put her pencil down. "The diagram," she said. "The one at the parts place. Was it like that too? Someone did it wrong and everyone was looking at the wrong thing." He looked at his daughter. "Yeah," he said. "Kind of exactly like that." She nodded, satisfied by the parallel, and picked her pencil back up. "Tell me what it sounds like when it works right." "I will," he said, and went. The Thursday session ran clean. He flushed the prep loop, recharged to the correct concentration for the ambient conditions, reset the expansion valve. He had Sasha run the prep zone through a simulated service cycle. Full ambient heat from the line, maximum load on the drawers. It held. Set point maintained throughout. No dropout. He stood and listened to it, run the way he always listened when something came back from being broken. Not for the sound of it working, exactly, but for the absence of the sound of it not working. The particular silence of a corrected fault. Sasha was standing nearby with her arms folded and the expression of someone who had learned to wait for the confirmation before letting herself believe it. "It's holding," he said. She unfolded her arms. "There's one more thing," he said. "The walk-in loop is fine now, but it's going to hit the same drift condition in 3 to 4 years if you keep topping off with pre-mixed fluid without testing concentration first." He handed her a card with a refractometer model number on it. $50 piece of equipment. Check it annually. Saves you what you just paid for 3 technicians and whatever this call costs. She looked at the card. "What does this call cost?" He named a number. It was fair, and it was not small. She looked at him with the expression that people used when they were deciding whether to say something. "The man who gave me your name from the forum," she said. "He said you were quiet about what you used to do. I looked you up anyway." A pause. "I recognize the work you did at Meridian Group in 2015. We use that system. We've been using it for 8 years. It's never been serviced because there's nothing to service." Damon was quiet. "I'm not bringing it up to flatter you," she said. "I'm bringing it up because I have a question, and I want you to know why I'm asking it. Ask it. I have a dinner in 11 days. 40 seats, no menu until the night of, sourced within 50 miles. It's the most significant event we've run." She paused. "I'd like you to be there, not to work. The system's going to run fine. I'd just like..." She stopped and chose her next words with the care of someone who was not accustomed to reaching for something she wasn't sure she'd get. "I would like the person who solved this problem to see the reason the problem needed solving." He thought about it. "I can bring my daughter." She blinked. "How old?" 7. "She's the one who spotted your display diagram error at Hartfield." A silence. Then, "The diagram in the parts section. High pressure and low pressure," said transposed. Sasha looked at him for a moment. "I'm going to have that fixed," she said. "I mentioned it to the parts counter kid, but I'll call them myself. Tomorrow." She shook her head slightly. "Bring your daughter." The event was on a Tuesday. Cold and still, the sky a particular shade of November navy that made everything look like a photograph of itself. They drove out through the county with Willa in the back seat in her good cardigan, navy blue, her grandmother had sent it, and the canvas bag in her lap, because she had decided this was a professional occasion, and professional occasions required equipment. Sasha met them in the courtyard, which had been transformed with low amber lighting and heat lamps and the easy movement of guests who knew how to inhabit a space that had been prepared for them. Inside, the kitchen was running at full service pace, and the dining room was filling with the particular quiet focus of people who had driven a long way to eat carefully. Willa looked around at the courtyard, the lights, the old timber bones of the building. "It's a barn," she said. "Originally," Damon said. "That's smart. Barns are built right." He didn't argue. Sasha crouched to Willa's level. She did it without hesitation, the smooth crouch of someone who didn't calculate the gesture, and said, "You're the one who caught the diagram." Willa considered her. "It was backward. It was. I'm having it replaced." She stood. "Come inside. I want to show you something." She took them into the kitchen corridor, not the service entrance but the inner pass-through, and stopped at a panel on the wall. It was the glycol system display, a schematic mounted behind glass, the kind used for staff reference. "This is the right one," Sasha said to Willa. "Both loops. See how they're split here after the secondary exchanger?" Willa leaned in and studied it. She traced the prep loop with her finger without touching the glass. "This one was the problem?" "That one," Damon said. "Because the fluid was wrong. Because the fluid had drifted. Close to wrong." Willa straightened up. She looked at her father. "Same as the display. It looked right if you didn't check." "Yes," he said. "Exactly like that." She nodded and went back to studying the diagram, and Damon stood next to Sasha in the corridor and didn't say anything for a moment because there wasn't anything to say that would improve the moment. A man appeared from the dining room doorway. He was perhaps 60, with the compact, self-contained energy of someone who moved through spaces without needing to announce himself, and he was looking at Sasha with the warmth of a long and complicated professional relationship. "Creel," he said. "Your refrigeration man?" "Damon Fisk," she said. "Porter Hale." Hale was the food writer. Damon hadn't read the piece. He didn't read that world anymore, but he'd been told about it by the farmer's market operator whose walk-in he'd fixed 2 years ago. Hale had apparently written about the larder in terms that had changed the restaurant's trajectory. Hale looked at Damon with the uncomplicated curiosity of someone who observed things for a living. "She told me the system went down and 3 people couldn't find it." "They found pieces of it," Damon said. "None of them had the context to put the pieces together, and you did. I'd seen it before." Hale studied him. "She also said you didn't want credit. I don't need it. Those are different." Damon looked at him. Hale almost smiled. They had dinner. Sasha had set 2 seats at the bar, which turned out to be the best vantage point in the room, where Willa could see the pass and watch the plates move from kitchen to table and ask questions about each one in a low voice, that the bartender, a young man named Cliff, answered with the patience of someone who had decided the 7-year-old was interesting company. Sasha found them near the end of service and sat down with the look of someone who had been running at full capacity for 4 hours and was now briefly at rest without being fully stopped. "Your daughter," she said to Damon, watching Willa explain something to Cliff about why the dessert plating was structurally logical, "is not a typical 7-year-old. No. What does she want to be? She changes. Last month it was a bridge engineer. Before that she wanted to design race cars." He paused. "She hasn't settled on anything that isn't structural yet." Sasha was quiet for a moment. Then, "I have a question and I want you to hear it as a straightforward professional inquiry." He waited. "Porter's writing about the dinner. He's not going to write about the refrigeration problem. That's not the story he's here for. But he's interested in you, in what you know. He mentioned a network he's part of, people who own or run significant food operations, and who accumulate equipment problems that nobody's been able to solve. The kind of problems that look like component failures and aren't." She paused. "I think you're going to get calls." He thought about that. "I work from my shop," he said. "My own schedule. I pick the problems. I'm not taking calls just because someone has budget for it." "Those are your terms?" "Those are my terms." She nodded. "That's going to make you slow to reach. I'm aware and expensive, also aware." She looked at him directly. "I want you to know something, and I want you to hear it as what it is. I looked up the Mercer Precision work before I called you. I know what Meridian Group was. I know what you walked away from. A pause. I called you because I needed someone who understood a specific problem. What I found when I got here, she paused, was better than I expected, and not because of the system. The silence after that was 3 seconds long. Not uncomfortable. That's honest, he said. I said it was. She stood, said something quiet to Cliff, and moved back toward the kitchen. At the bar, Willa was drawing on a cocktail napkin, a refrigeration loop diagram, done from memory, both loops correctly indicated, a small arrow showing glycol flow direction. She held it up. Is this right? She asked Damon. He looked at it carefully. Almost, he said. The secondary exchanger interface. See here, the low-pressure feed should come in from this side. She looked at where he was pointing. Turned the napkin, drew a correction arrow. Now it's right. She folded the napkin and put it in the canvas bag with the screwdrivers and the magnetic pickup tool and the measuring tape she called the stretcher. They left at 9:15. Willa was most of the way asleep by the time they hit the county road, her head against the window, the bag on her lap. Damon drove through the dark in the quiet of a November night, with his daughter breathing slowly beside him, and thought about the week that had just happened. He thought about the showroom on Monday, the deliberate indifference. The man who'd looked at them and seen the flower and the canvas bag and made his conclusions without spending another second on the question. He thought about what Willa had done, walked up to a professionally mounted display diagram, and told the room it was wrong with the easy certainty of someone reporting the weather. He thought about Kemper's face. He thought about what Kemper hadn't seen. The patents, the product line running in 47 restaurants, the 2 years of commission work that a firm in Seattle still listed on their active reference page. He thought about all of it, and then he thought about how little of it mattered in any way that was actually relevant to his life, and how long it had taken him to understand that. He thought about Jenna. He thought about her the way he thought about her now, without the weight of the first 3 years, the specific gravity of a grief that had been so heavy he'd built an entire life in a small town just to stand somewhere solid enough to hold it. She would have found Kemper funny in the particular way she found people funny when they revealed themselves without meaning to. She would have said something sharp and accurate on the drive home that made the whole thing smaller and truer at once. She was good at that. Willa stirred. The food was good, she said, mostly asleep. It was. The system working is why the food was good. He looked at her in the rearview mirror. That's right, he said. So we helped. He drove for a moment in the county dark, past the fields and the fence lines, and the occasional lit window of a farmhouse that had been there since before he was born. Yeah, Bug, he said. We helped. She was asleep again before the next turn. The canvas bag sat in her lap with the screwdrivers and the pickup tool and the measuring tape and the folded napkin with the corrected diagram inside it. Damon drove home through streets that were empty and ordinary and entirely his, past the shop with its unlit sign, past the hardware store and the diner and the elementary school where Willa had once explained the load-bearing logic of a jungle gym to a substitute teacher who'd listened with increasing confusion and then gone to find the principal. Past all the ordinary architecture of a life that didn't look like anything from the outside and was the whole world from where he stood inside it. He was not hiding anymore, he understood. He had been, for a while, using the smallness of the town and the smallness of the work as a place to stand until he could trust the ground. But the ground had been solid for some time now, and what he'd taken for hiding had become, without his deciding it, the actual shape of his life, the work he chose, the morning sounds, the folded napkin in a green canvas bag. The calls would come. Hartfield's diagram would be fixed or it wouldn't. Sasha Creel would send someone his way, and he would take the work that interested him and leave the rest. He could be the man with flour on his shirt and the engineer with the 17-year service record. He'd never needed to choose between them. He just needed to stop thinking the world required him to. He carried Willa inside. She reached, half asleep, for the bag, and he set it on the nightstand beside the rabbit without being asked, because he already knew that's where it went. He stood in the doorway for a moment, the nightlight on, her breathing already slow and authoritative and completely unworried. Outside, November was doing its serious work. The temperature had dropped another degree or two, the kind of cold that got into gaps and found them. There was a hinge on the side gate that still needed fixing. There was a brake line he should look at before the week was out. There was a whole ordinary life ahead of him, the fleet invoices and the school pickups, and the particular negotiation of a daughter who considered waking up optional. All of it unchanged, all of it exactly what he'd chosen. And there was the rest of it too now. The list Sasha would send. The work that no one else could do because no one else had been in the library at 26 pulling journal articles about glycol drift conditions in split-loop systems out of pure interest, and no one else had written it down and no one else had remembered it. He went back to the kitchen. He sat at the table with a glass of water and opened the notepad where he'd sketched the flush procedure and looked at it for a moment. The problem was solved. The work was clean. Somewhere in a dining room in Galvey County, 40 people had eaten something that required a system to function correctly. And the system had functioned correctly because he had looked at the actual problem and not the apparent one. That was enough. That had always been enough. He was just finally in a position to see that being enough wasn't the same as being small. He turned off the kitchen light and went down the hall and checked on Willa once more. The nightlight, the breathing, the rabbit, the bag on the nightstand. Then he went to bed. He fell asleep without effort, without the dark circling of a mind that couldn't settle. And when Willa's elbow found his ribs at 5:47 in the morning, he was ready for it.